Hello everyone. Before we begin, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you? Now, let me tell you a story. It started with the trees. I noticed it first on a cedar not far from my latest campsite. 3 thin lines carved into the bark, perfectly parallel. They weren't fresh. The wood had healed slightly around the edges, but the grooves were clean, intentional, not animal scratches. I passed another tree 10 minutes later. Same 3 lines, same spacing. I marked them on my map, or tried to. The map was blank. No markings, no trails, just topographic lines, but they didn't match anything around me anymore. The ridge lines were in the wrong places. Elevation profiles led me in circles, and the location of the lake, assuming I could even call it a lake now, shifted depending on where I stood. Still, I traced a rough path, tried to mark the carvings, and then I saw the 4th tree. This one was different. It didn't have 3 lines. It had 16. They spiraled around the trunk in concentric bands, each one deeper than the last. Near the base, the bark was torn back entirely, stripped away to reveal the pale inner flesh of the wood. Someone had carved symbols there, carefully, desperately. They matched the ones I'd seen in my journal. I ran my fingers over the etchings, half expecting them to hum or glow. They didn't, but I felt them, pressure behind the eyes, a tug in my stomach, like I just looked at something I wasn't supposed to see and now couldn't unsee it. Beneath the symbols, near the roots, someone had written a single word. Remember. I kept walking, I don't know for how long. The sky was gray and flat, and time had stopped making sense. But the trees changed again, first in density, then in texture. They looked older, not by years, but by design. Wider trunks, bark that shimmered faintly in the corner of my eye, roots that intertwined and curved above the surface like frozen rivers. I passed more symbols, more carvings. Some were deep in the wood, almost fossilized. Others were fresher, scratched in haste, chipped in panic. I found what was left of a camp. It had been buried, not by weather, not by age, but intentionally. A few branches formed a crude lean-to, long since collapsed. Beneath it, half covered by rotting leaves, I found a rusted kettle, a plastic tarp, the shattered frame of a solar charger, and a notebook sealed inside a waterproof bag. I opened it with shaking fingers. The first page was blank, the second, too, then the third. Words scribbled and slanted, growing more chaotic as the pages went on. Day 1. Something's wrong with the trees. They aren't where I remember. I think I got turned around, but the compass won't stabilize. Day 2. Lights under the lake, not just light, patterns. Too consistent for wildlife. I thought it was beautiful. I was an idiot. Day 3. Found a mark on my skin, circular, like a bruise or burn. Can't remember when it appeared. Day 4. Time isn't moving right. Slept for hours, sun hasn't changed. Heard voices in the reflection. One said my name. Day? There are others, or versions. I saw myself walking between the trees. It didn't blink. Day? RT wants to open me. I read those last words again and again. It wants to open me. The letters were shaky, smudged. The final ones trailed off mid-stroke, like the writer had dropped the pen. I turned the page. There were symbols, drawn by hand. repeating, variations on the concentric rings I'd seen before, only more elaborate, more complete. And beneath them, they remember through us. We're the storage. They don't record like we do. They store memory inside structure, inside people. The markings aren't a warning. They're an address. I dropped the notebook, stumbled backward, the world tilted. Not metaphorically, literally. The horizon shifted, the trees leaning 30 degrees to the left, while the ground remained flat. My stomach dropped, a low hum rose through the soil. The lake was calling again, not just through sound, through pressure, through memory. I started to hear voices. Please let me go. You're not real. I made it out, I think. We were here before. We'll be here after. It just wants to know. Some of them were mine, things I had said, whispers I hadn't remembered speaking aloud. Some were others. I recognized one, the voice from the notebook. Same frantic cadence, same tired desperation. It was still here, stored, remembered. I ran. The trees bent around me, literally bent, not swayed. As I passed, their trunks leaned away, like magnets flipping polarity, and in the gaps between them, I saw glimpses of other things. A man curled in a fetal position beneath the roots. A tent frozen mid-collapse, flapping despite the windless air. A woman's face half submerged in the lake, eyes wide, unmoving. Dozens of boots, all mismatched, all facing the same direction. The forest wasn't a forest anymore. It was architecture, memory built from the impressions of those who had come before. I stopped at the base of a massive tree, larger than any redwood I'd ever seen. Its trunk was black, smooth, too perfect to be natural. On its bark, hundreds of names had been carved. My hand moved before I could stop it. I carved my own. The moment the blade cut into the bark, the sound stopped. The air stilled. The trees straightened. The light shifted. Everything aligned, and I knew. The lake had recorded me. I was now part of it, not lost, stored. Here we go, into the next layer of the descent. I didn't want to sleep. After what I'd seen, the names carved into that black, perfect tree, the notebook full of desperation, the reflections that moved on their own. I knew what sleep meant here. It meant surrender. It meant letting them in. But eventually my body gave up. I sat with my back against the roots, knife in hand, trying to count the seconds just to anchor myself. And somewhere in the 4000s, I blinked and woke up hours later to the sound of breathing. It wasn't mine. It came from somewhere just beyond the clearing, deep and uneven. Not a bear's huff, not the sharp inhale of a coyote. Human, or at least trying to be. I reached for my knife. It was gone. Panic struck like a jolt to the chest, but before I could move, the breathing stopped. Footsteps replaced it. Slow, deliberate, crunching damp leaves. Something was walking toward me. I forced myself upright, every muscle aching, heart racing. Then a voice called out from the trees. "Hey," it said, "you're still here?" It sounded normal, male, mid-40s, maybe friendly. I didn't answer. He stepped into view, tall, bearded, wearing a faded ranger jacket and a battered backpack. His hair was matted. His boots were soaked. But his eyes were alert, alive. And then I realized what made the unease bloom in my stomach. He was too clean. His jacket wasn't torn. His pack wasn't dirty. His voice didn't shake. He looked like someone who had just stepped onto the trail, not like someone who'd survived what I had. I took a step back. He raised both hands casually. "Whoa, easy," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you." "Who are you?" I asked. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Ellis," he said. "I used to work the western edge of this forest before they shut it all down." He gestured around. "Used to be a lake here, Shrouded Lake. Not on the tourist maps. Not anymore." I stared at him. "I'm not the first, am I?" I asked. Ellis shook his head, grin fading. "No," he said. "Not by a long shot." He stepped closer, slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. "You're not supposed to find this place," he said. "And once you do, it doesn't really let you go." I figured that much. He nodded toward the black tree behind me. "You saw it?" "Yeah." He winced. "Then it saw you too." For a long moment, we just stood there in silence. The forest didn't make a sound, no birds, no breeze. Even the leaves seemed to hold their breath. "How long have you been here?" I asked. He scratched his chin, eyes narrowing. "Time's tricky," he said. "Sometimes it feels like a week. Sometimes it feels like years. Depends on where you're standing, or what you're touching. Some of the stones, they're not rocks. They're memory anchors." I stared at him. He smiled again, but it was different this time. Sad. "I've seen versions of me," he said. 6, maybe 7. One hung himself in a pine tree I used to camp under. Another walked into the water and never came back out. One just sat down and forgot to get back up. I felt ice crawl up my spine. "You're real?" I asked. Ellis didn't answer. Instead, he turned and started walking. I followed. Not out of trust. I didn't trust anything anymore, but because being alone had started to feel more dangerous than any stranger. We moved through the forest in silence. Ellis walked with purpose, never checking a compass, never hesitating. Eventually, he stopped at what looked like a shallow ravine choked with vines. He brushed some aside and revealed a narrow path. "This is where I go when it gets too loud," he said. I didn't move. Ellis tilted his head. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked. "The attention, the pressure behind your thoughts, like someone else is trying to turn your mind like a key." I swallowed. "Yes," he nodded. "They don't mean harm," he said. "They're just curious in the way hurricanes are curious, in the way oceans explore your lungs." He crouched by the path. "If you follow this trail, you'll reach the edge," he said. "The edge of what?" He smiled, wide this time. "Whatever's left." I didn't follow him. Something in my gut, in my memory, stopped me. Ellis had never blinked, not once. And now that I thought about it, I couldn't remember hearing his footsteps when he moved. No crunch of leaves. No snapping twigs. He was performing humanity, mimicking it, like the thing in the lake had pulled the idea of a ranger from my memories and stitched it together wrong. I turned away, and when I looked back, Ellis was gone. No footprints, no voice. Just fog. I kept walking. I passed more carvings, a melted flashlight, a half-eaten meal that hadn't rotted, an open journal with blank pages, except the last, in someone else's hand. He told me he worked here. He didn't. He said I was safe. I wasn't. He said follow the trail. I did. The next page had a line carved into the paper over and over until it cut through. He never blinked. I ran. Not from Ellis, from the idea of Ellis, from the possibility that every person I might meet here was just a shape, built by something vast and patient and incomprehensible. I ran until the trees changed again, until I broke through to the clearing and saw the lake. But now there were others. Silhouettes lined the opposite bank, still, watching. Not people, shapes, like unfinished thoughts wearing borrowed skin. They stood shoulder to shoulder, unmoving, as the mist twisted between them. And I knew, deep in the root of my spine, I had been noticed. Ellis wasn't the first. He wouldn't be the last. They were learning, and now they were getting better at it. Here comes the next descent into identity collapse. They didn't move. The shapes standing across the lake, 20 of them, maybe more, remained perfectly still. Not even the mist stirred around their feet. From where I stood, they looked like people. Same height, same posture, same human outline. But there was something missing. Some part of them left unfinished. They had arms, legs, heads, but the proportions were off. Too symmetrical, too precise. Their stillness wasn't natural. It was practiced, like mannequins holding a pose, or children frozen in a game they didn't understand. I didn't want to approach, but I did. As I moved closer to the shoreline, the mist thickened. It curled around my legs like smoke, cold and scentless. Each step felt heavier, not like fatigue, like resistance, like the ground itself didn't want me there. When I reached the water's edge, the shapes across the lake shifted, not their bodies, but the surface. The reflection broke apart, and then it changed. I saw myself, not just reflected, projected, standing on the opposite shore in the same position, wearing the same clothes, same boots, same dirt-smudged face, but that version of me was smiling. The grin stretched slowly, too wide, and the copy stepped forward. The lake didn't ripple. Its surface held as if it wasn't water anymore, but glass. I watched myself walk toward me across the lake, step by step, weightless. I backed away. My breath came fast and shallow. The mist swirled around my ankles. My lungs burned. My vision blurred at the edges. Then my reflection, my double, stopped. 10 feet away. On the water, looking straight at me, it opened its mouth, and I heard my voice. "Do you remember the sound of your own scream?" I said nothing. The copy tilted its head. "I do," it said. "I remember it perfectly. I remember the moment it echoed inside your chest. I remember the way your heart skipped, the taste of copper behind your teeth." It took a step closer. "You think you're the original." Another step. "You think there's a you left to protect." Another. But we remember differently. I tried to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. The lake pulsed once. Not a wave, a flicker like a skipped frame, and the copy shuddered subtly like a glitch. Then it smiled again. "Do you remember the tree?" it asked. My pulse spiked. "The one with the names carved into it?" I nodded slowly. The copy mirrored me. "But do you remember which name was yours?" it asked. "Because I don't." Something cracked inside me, a thought I hadn't dared consider. What if I wasn't the original? What if that scream, the one echoing inside the woods, the one I couldn't explain, hadn't been mine at all? What if I was the echo, the reflection, the result of someone else's story? I stumbled backward, eyes wide. The mist thickened behind me. and I backed into something solid. A hand on my shoulder. I turned. Another copy. Closer now. Perfect down to the scar on my left thumb, down to the tiny tear on the collar of my shirt. It stared into my face and said we came from the same moment. I couldn't breathe. The first copy stepped off the lake. Now they stood on either side of me. They spoke together, not in unison, but in chorus. Which version will remember? Something changed, then the mist pulled back, and I saw others, dozens of me, scattered across the shore, between trees, kneeling in the grass, lying face down in the dirt. All of them stuck in moments I vaguely remembered. One wept, one screamed silently. One stood completely still with his hands over his ears. A few wandered in slow, meandering loops, as if lost in a memory they couldn't escape. And I knew I had been here before, over and over. Each me was a failed version, a memory shard, discarded but not forgotten. The lake kept them. I dropped to my knees, my mind buckled under the weight of it. The lake didn't kill people. It fractured them. It ran simulations, over and over. Every person who'd come here, every hiker, every wanderer, every Ellis, had been remembered, repeated, rebuilt. It didn't matter which one was the original anymore. There was no original, just echoes, patterns, recordings. And then, behind all the noise, I heard a new voice, smaller, real, not inside my head, not projected. It whispered, "Don't listen to them." I turned. A woman stood at the tree line, backlit by fading sunlight, or what looked like sunlight. She was real. She was imperfect, hair tangled, shirt torn, blood on one sleeve, a limp in her stance. Her boots were mismatched. Her fingers trembled. Everything about her screamed human. "Who are you?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "Someone who made it farther than you." Here we go. The unraveling deepens. She didn't wait for me to follow. The woman turned and walked back into the trees, each step fast and deliberate, like someone who'd memorized every route and bend in the path, or had at least walked it enough times to fake certainty. I hesitated only a second before going after her. The copies, the echo versions of myself that had circled the lake, didn't follow. They just watched, unmoving, expressionless, still as stone. Even as I turned my back on them, I could feel their gaze pressing between my shoulder blades like the weight of a second spine. She didn't speak until we were a half-mile in. Then she finally said, without turning around, "Don't ask my name." "Why?" "Because I'm not sure it's mine anymore. And if you say it out loud, something else might answer." That shut me up. The woods around us were different now, not just darker, but segmented, like reality had been folded too many times, and now the creases were showing. Patches of the forest repeated. A tree we passed reappeared 20 seconds later on our left. A stump I nearly tripped over was suddenly in front of me again, but mirrored. "Are we in a loop?" I asked. She shook her head. "Worse, we're in a collapse." We walked in silence for what felt like hours. The light never changed. The sky above flickered every few minutes, a subtle film-like jitter that made the clouds smear slightly before reassembling. At one point, the path beneath us went flat. Not dirt, not stone, just flat like the idea of ground had given up and rendered as a featureless plain. We stepped onto it, and it didn't respond. Our boots made no sound. Our shadows didn't move. "Keep going," she said, not looking down. So I did. Eventually we came to a break, a cliff. It jutted out into nothing. No slope, no descent, just edge. The forest behind us ended there, the last tree's roots curling into empty air like veins disconnected from a body. And in the void ahead I saw a bridge, but not one made by hands. This thing was built of memories, stretched out scenes like stills from a dream, suspended in meter and held together by context, not physics. I could see pieces of my old life floating in the span ahead. My bedroom window at sunrise, the subway seat where I used to sit, the trail marker I passed 2 days ago, or maybe 100. She stopped beside me, watching my face. "It'll hold," she said. I didn't move. She turned and looked me dead in the eye. "It'll hold for you, because it's your path." The moment I stepped onto it, the world behind me folded. Literally, the forest closed like a book, each tree flattening into the next, then vanishing into a single black line on the horizon. My ears rang. My balance shifted. I staggered. "Don't stop," she said, already 10 feet ahead. I followed. Each step across the memory bridge took me through a version of something I remembered, but wrong. I passed through a recreation of my apartment, but it smelled like moss and lake water. I stepped across a segment that looked like my childhood bedroom, except the door was missing and the windows were filled with still water pressing inward. A fragment of a grocery store, shelves full of blackened teeth where cereal boxes should have been, a parking lot full of people with their backs turned, standing perfectly still. Each one was a corrupted shard of my life, rebuilt by something that had never been human, but wanted desperately to understand what it meant to be. "Why is it showing me this?" I asked. She didn't answer. At the halfway point, the bridge bent, not downward but inward, like it was folding into my skull. I staggered again, and this time when I looked down, I saw water, still and dark and underneath everything. Not just beneath the bridge, beneath reality, the lake wasn't a place. It was a layer, a fluid thought pressed beneath the surface of everything, a presence older than time, older than context. Not an entity, an intention. I dropped to my hands and knees. My memories screamed. Not voices, not images, just noise. Static in the shape of who I used to be. Each thought felt like it was being graded, cataloged, and stored. She crouched beside me. "They're pulling on you," she said, "trying to wear you like skin. The more you question what's real, the easier it is for them to get in." I looked up at her. Her face was pale, drawn. "You felt it," I said. She nodded. "I still do." We reached the far side of the bridge and stepped onto solid ground again. Real dirt, real trees, real gravity, or something that mimicked them well enough. She collapsed against a tree and exhaled hard. "This is the outer layer," she said. "It won't hold long, but it's quiet here." I sat beside her, still shaking. She reached into her pack and pulled out a worn notebook. Not hers. Another survivor's. Inside were drawings, sketches of the lake, the bridge, the tree with the names. But one page stood out, a diagram, a spiral, labeled in jagged handwriting. Surface, memory, reflection, echo, signal, absorption, contact, agreement, transfer, rewrite, replacement, storage. I looked at her. "Which layer are we in now?" She met my eyes. "Signal," she said, and somewhere in the distance something heard her speak and answered, "Let's continue. The system is rewriting." It started with the small things, the color of the woman's eyes. They had been green. I was sure of it. A rich mossy green. I remember thinking it reminded me of the lake before it turned wrong. But now they were gray, steel gray. When I asked about it, she said nothing. Just looked at me like I'd asked about the weather. Later, she called me by a name I didn't recognize. "Devon," she said, handing me a water bottle. I stopped. "What did you just call me?" She frowned, confused. "Devon. That's not my name." Her face twisted slightly, as if she were trying to remember a password that no longer worked. "Are you sure?" I didn't answer, because I wasn't. We kept walking. The outer layer, the one she called signal, was thinning. I could feel it. The trees looked normal, but their shadows lingered after we moved. Footsteps echoed wrong, sometimes delayed, sometimes in advance. Once I heard myself breathing before I actually took a breath. Reality was slipping, and worse, I felt myself slipping with it. I tried to remember the name of my high school. Blank. The address of my first apartment. Gone. I could still remember feelings, what it was like to stand on a subway platform during rush hour, the taste of burnt coffee, the way my dad used to hum out of tune when he worked on the car. But the details were disintegrating. Rewritten, overwritten, replaced. At the edge of a frozen creek, I found a rock with a familiar symbol, 3 concentric circles, just like the one on my foot, now darker than ever. The inner ring had turned almost black. The outer 2 glowed faintly under moonlight. I sat beside the rock. The woman crouched nearby. "It's starting," she said. "What is?" "The protocol." She didn't have to explain. I knew. Rewrite protocol. The moment the lake begins assimilating its subjects permanently, first it records you, then it copies, then it edits. "Why me?" I asked. She looked at me, expression unreadable. "Because you didn't run." "Neither did you," she smiled. Not kindly. "I did. I'm still running. But I stopped being me 5 layers ago." I stared at her. She pulled up the sleeve of her jacket. Her forearm was covered in rings. Tattooed, burned, etched, I couldn't tell. The marks shimmered subtly, as if remembering light from a place that had no sun. "I think I've been here." "Months?" she said. "Years?" She shrugged. Time collapses after rewrite. We camped by the creek that night. Neither of us slept. At some point I asked the question that had been clawing at my brain since the moment we met. "How do you know I'm not one of them?" She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "You might be." That should have terrified me. Instead, it made a sick kind of sense. The next morning we found the corridor. That's the only word I can use. It wasn't a cave, and it wasn't man-made. It just existed, carved into a rock face that hadn't been there the day before. Smooth walls, seamless ceiling, no visible source of light. She stepped in first, I followed. It went on forever, or maybe for a few minutes. But the moment we entered, I knew we had crossed another threshold. The temperature dropped, the air turned metallic, and the walls began to change. Not visually, conceptually. They started showing us things. On one side, a memory I hadn't accessed in years. My 5th birthday party, my mom holding a lopsided cake. My friend Ben laughing, missing 2 teeth. On the other wall, a version of that same memory, but different. Same cake, different house. No Ben, no mother. Just me alone singing to myself. I turned away. It followed me. Each new step showed more memories fractured, stitched together, played out wrong. Me graduating from a school I'd never attended. Me proposing to someone I didn't know. Me screaming from behind the lake's surface, hands pressed against glass that wasn't there. The woman reached out and touched one of her memories, a moment frozen in time. And she changed. Just a flicker. Her hair shifted color. The blood stain on her sleeve vanished. When she pulled her hand back, she gasped, as if something had punched the air out of her. "They're sinking us," she whispered. I backed away from the walls, heart racing. "They're not just rewriting," I said. "They're letting us rewrite ourselves." She nodded slowly. "That's the trap." The corridor ended abruptly. A circular chamber opened ahead. Inside, the air was still. Perfect. The walls shimmered with a faint, pulsating light. At the center stood a pillar made of the same black stone as the name tree. On it, a book, open, blank. We stepped forward together, and words appeared on the page. Not printed, not written, manifested. In my own handwriting. He approached the center, confused, broken, fragmented by memory. He saw himself in the woman. He saw the lake in his own mind. He began to accept the truth, that none of this was being done to him. He had chosen it. "No," I whispered. The book turned a page. He denied it at first. Most of them do. But the lake doesn't choose. It only answers the call. I looked up at her. Tears ran down her cheeks. "You remember now," I said. She nodded slowly. Then said the words I'd been too afraid to speak. "We came here on purpose." The chamber pulsed like a living thing, with every slow, synchronized flicker of light. The book on the black stone pedestal filled with new words, not like ink, not like typing, more like consequence, thoughts that had already been decided, writing themselves just moments before they came into being. The woman beside me, the one who had guided me this far, had gone quiet, still as a statue. I watched her face change subtly, like pieces of different expressions were filtering across it. Sorrow, wonder, fear. And then something else entirely. Recognition. "I remember," she whispered. "Remember what?" Her eyes found mine. I was the first. The words hit harder than I expected. "First to what?" She turned toward the chamber walls. They flickered like stretched skin, lit from behind by a soft glow. Beneath the shimmer I could see layers, not stone, but impressions. Frozen moments, faces, gestures. People paused in mid-scream or mid-thought. Not dead, not alive, just recorded. Like flies in amber. "I was the first one it reached fully," she said. "The first who didn't run. The first who stayed long enough to be used. You told me you didn't know your name. I lied. What is it?" She looked at me for a long time before answering, "Ellis." I staggered back. She didn't follow. "Ellis was a ranger," I said. "I saw him. He found me. He." "No," she said. "Ellis was me. That form. That shape. The lake tried to help you understand. It used the clearest pattern it had." She placed a hand over her chest. "I've worn 1,000 faces here, guided people through this same chamber, watched them unravel. I watched you before. That's not possible. It's not about possible. Not here. The book turned another page, blank at first, then words. He stood at the threshold, the final room, the deepest layer. There were no more illusions to hide behind, no more names to hold on to. Only one question remained. Will he stay, or will he be stored? I stepped back. No, I said. I never agreed to this. A shimmer passed over the walls, as if the chamber itself smiled. Then came the voice, not mine, not hers, not sound at all, just knowing. You did. And suddenly I remembered the bus ticket, the voicemail I never returned, the moment in my apartment when the lights flickered and the sound of water filled the room, even though no faucet was running. The impulse I couldn't explain, to find the most remote place I could and be alone, to be still, to vanish. I hadn't been lured here. I had asked to be forgotten. Behind me, the corridor was gone. The entrance had collapsed into itself, replaced by mirrored walls that reflected nothing at all. The woman, Ellis, stepped forward and placed a hand on the pedestal. The book went still, and then it spoke, not aloud, not in voice. It remembered me, my name, my first breath, my worst lie, my deepest shame. Every word I ever spoke in anger, every kindness I thought no one noticed, every version of me I'd tried to forget. All of it, held now, understood, preserved. I dropped to my knees. I didn't cry, I didn't speak, because what was left to say? When something knows you that completely, not just what you did, but why, what use is explanation? Across from me, Ellis sat, mirroring my posture. We have one more choice, she said. I looked up. You can leave, she said. They'll let you, but it won't be you that returns. You'll be lighter. You'll remember just enough to survive. A shell smoothed and emptied. The world won't notice. But you will. I swallowed. And the other option? She exhaled slowly. You stay, not as you, not as flesh, but as storage, memory, structure. You help the next one through. You become part of the system, part of the remembering. I looked at the pedestal. The book had stopped turning. It was waiting. I stood. My legs felt weak, but real. I walked to the book. The pedestal pulsed once, like a heartbeat recognizing its owner. Can I write in it? I asked. Ellis nodded. You already are. I leaned over the book. On the blank page, new words appeared. He stood at the final threshold, neither saved nor lost. Not victim, not hero, not original, not copy. Only one truth remained. He remembered. I took the pen. I didn't know where it came from. Maybe I'd always had it. Maybe it was part of me. I wrote a single sentence. If someone finds this, you are not alone. Then I signed my name. Whatever it had once been, whatever it was now. The chamber dimmed. Ellis smiled, truly, for the first time, and the lake sighed, not in relief, not in grief, in completion. A memory filed, a pattern closed, a new voice ready to guide the next.